Hi, welcome to the second video of this course. In this course, we are going to cover comments, variables and data types, arithmetic and relational operators, and if-else statements. We will end the video by making a small project, a calculator, which will include all of these things just to understand them better in detail. So we are going to start off with understanding what is a comment and exactly why do we need a comment. So first of all, comment is used for organizing your code. It can also be used for just explaining your things, because once you write a piece of code, this piece of code will not be only used by you. It may be some other developer that might have a look or might want to change the code. So it will be helpful for him to understand your code just if you put comments. Normally, if I was to put a comment, hello, hi, and just run the code, it will not execute because it thinks that this is the command. The compiler thinks that this is the command. So in order to put a comment, in order to tell the compiler that we are making a comment, we are not giving it as an instruction, you just put 2/ front of it, and there's some, and now if we were to run it, just build succeeded. So it's successfully operating. The second way to put a comment is if you can use / and then star, and then you can end the same code with this, and then in between you can write your long paragraph or whatever you want to write to in order to explain the code. If we were to take an example, let's say you are making a calculator. Calculator takes the input, processes the input, and outputs the input. So you can maybe have 3 comments stating taking the input, processing the input, and finally outputting the input. And then underneath you can have your code, just so it is much more organized and it is much more easier for someone to understand your code because of your comments. So now we are going to have a look at the variables and data types. Let me just put a comment so we know that we are covering variables and data types. So let's just understand first of all what exactly the variable is. So we have 2 things, variables and then data types. Let's just understand what exactly the variable is. Variable is a container that has the data that you want to have in your program. So if we were to take a real world example, let's say we have a basket and this basket is a variable, and we have apples. We will store those apples in the basket. However, there are 2 more things that can happen with the variables. Either that basket can overflow, so let's assume that there are more apples than the capacity of basket, so it will just overflow. You won't be able to store in it. And secondly, with the variables, you have to have the same type of variables. So we had a basket for apples. We can't put oranges in the basket of apples. We must have specifically designated baskets for each fruit that we are going to store in. So let's just write that down so you understand. There are 2 main things that you need to remember. The first thing about the variable, it can overflow. It has a specific size, and it can overflow. This is also known as data overflow, data type overflow. Data overflow, just like that. Second thing to remember is that the variables must be specific to what that data type is being stored in them. So we can't have a variable for text and then store integer in them or number in them. So variables must have same data type. By same data type, it basically means that each data type has a different variable for it. So for example, a number would have a different variable as compared to the text. We use string for the text and then we use integer for the number. We are going to talk about that later, but for now just understand that the text cannot be stored in the variable that is for the number, and then the number cannot be stored in the text variable. Secondly, we have data types. So this is interesting. So right now we have a data type. Variable is a container which basically stores data, and there are two things mainly you need to remember about the variables. One is that it has a specific size, and second one is that it must have a same type. So we can't store number in the variable of a text. There must be a specific variable for each. And now we have a data type. Data type, exactly what we are talking about here, same data type. So we are going to look at the 5 different data types that you need to remember. Let me just write that down first. So these 5 are the data types that we need to remember. First of all, we have int. So that is a data type. Int is basically used to store a number. Now we can't store text, we can't assign it to the text, and we are going to understand that how do we assign these data types to variables and how do we exactly create a variable. Let's just remember this. So int is used to store a number, float is used to store a decimal number. So let me just put it in front of it so we can store 10.12. And here we can only store 10. Then we have a char, which is basically used to store a character. So it may be, and we must have these apostrophes around these. So we can store maybe one character A, or we can store minus, or even plus, or any sign that you want to, or even a number 2. But it has to be one character. And used to store a text, so it may be like hello world. Now notice that these quotation marks need to be around the string, and here we only had a one single apostrophe, so there's a difference between them. And then bool is used to store a simple true or false value. So we can have either true or false. Let's just create a variable to understand exactly what we've discussed so far. So first of all, the syntax of the variable will be, first of all, we are going to declare the data type, and then we are going to name our variable. So we are going to say we want to create an int, and in order to make a variable, you first of all specify the data type, which is the int. We are making the int, and then you are supposed to give it a name, and this name could be anything. It doesn't have to be a specific, although it must be easy to understand. So we have a salary, we just name it a salary, or maybe my salary, and then we give it a equal sign, and that's where we can assign value. So we will have value now, let's say 1000, and then semicolon. So we've just made our int variable. The syntax is pretty easy. We have a data type initially, we have a name, and then we always use this equal sign in order to assign it to something, and then we have 1000, and we end it with the apostrophe, with the semicolon, and this is must. Now we are just going to output our variable to see whether it works or not. So let me put endl. Accidentally removed the post semicolon. So you see it won't work without the semicolon. And now you can see we made our variable, and then we stored 1000, and we can output our variable using cout here. Now there's also something interesting that we've earlier talked about that we can see. It was the size. So how do you know that your number is not too big, or the size of the variable or the value that you're trying to store can be stored in the variable? So you can do is come here and type size of int, and this will show us the size, and we have 4 bytes of integer, 4 byte of size for the integer. And we can also in fact output the number. So that's the int max, the max number that can be stored in the int data type. Let's just run this, copy this. So that's the maximum number that we can store in our int. We are going to assign it here, but instead of saying 7, we will do 8 because it's a bigger value, right? Let's just see what happens. If we run the program, as you can see, implicit conversion from the long to int changes value of, so this is basically called a data type overflow. So this is basically known as the data overflow. The thing is not working. We have a value, positive value, and it's not exactly showing because it's converting. When it converts from the long data type to the int, it just changes it. It makes them negative. So that's the thing to remember. Although, I mean, majority of the cases, or at least when you are starting to program, you are not really going to encounter this problem of data type overflow because you are not going to have that big of values. Let's just make another variable for the text string. So again, just same as the int we've done, we will first declare our data type, which we are going to use a string. And also the thing need to remember is that it is a case sensitive language, so we must have this s, and we must in fact have the whole word string in the lowercase letters string. We give it a name, my name, and then we can assign it to the value. And remember, here we've talked about the quotation marks, so we're going to have 2 quotation marks around them and then semicolons. Here we can have maybe hello world. In fact, we are going to change this name to the my first program, and then cout. And it just it will see out the hello world here. Now it's also important to remember that we need to have good names for our variables. So let's say if you are storing, right now we don't have it in fact, but when we are storing, let's say salary, and you give it a name of my first, nobody could really understand what exactly you're trying to store. So you need to improve the readability. You need to keep in mind that your program needs to be readable to other people, and it's important to have the right names. So instead of just typing something random, you need to have something really good. So maybe my first project. That looks better than my first. Next we have arithmetic operators. So we are going to first of all list 5 different arithmetic operators, and then we are going to understand what are they and exactly how do we use in the programming. So let me just list it down first. So we have listed 5 different types of arithmetic operators. Now we are going to understand exactly what are they used for. So minus, as we all know, it is used for subtraction. Then we have a plus here. It is used for addition. Multiplication, this star sign, this is for division, and this is for module. It is helpful to write that down too. So let me just write that down really quick. Let's just go to understand how do we use them. So I'm pretty sure that you all know what all these mean, and this is module where you are going to understand it. This basically returns a remainder of the number that you want to divide it by. We are going to use it. We declare 2 different variables. We are going to declare int number1, num1. We are going to equal it by 10, let's suppose. In fact, what we can do is we are going to take an input, so we can assign it to 0. Then we have int num2, we assign it to 0 again, and then we can take the input. So first of all, we are going to let the user know what do we want as an input. So num1. Notice that I'm not putting endl because I don't want it to be on the next line. I want it to be on the same line when I do cin num1, and then we do cout num2, then reduce num2. So now we are taking the input of two different numbers for two different variables. Now what we can do is we will use basically arithmetic operators to do something with them. So we will cout num1 using the addition, in fact use subtraction minus sign, and then num2. In fact, just to make it more understandable, calculations. So here we are using basically our arithmetic operators. Let's see whether it works or not. So here we have num1, it's asking for the input here, and we are going to say 10. For the number 2 we are going to do 5. So hopefully our result will be 5, because we are basically subtracting num2, number 2, from number 1. And as you can see, the calculation is 5. Now we can use plus and we see whether it works or not. So maybe 5 again and then 5 again, and we have 10. And all of these work quite similar. I'm pretty sure that you all understand what the multiplication is and division is. Let me just explain you the module. If we have a module here, let's see what exactly. It basically outputs the remainder. And what we can do is, let me just output it first. So we have maybe 10 divided by 3, and our remainder is 1. Now if I was to do 10 and 2, it will give us a remainder of a 0, and we can use this remainder to also find out even and odd numbers, which we are going to do at the end of our program. We have not covered the if-else statement yet, and once we do cover, we will have a look at this module operator as well, module arithmetic operator. So I'm pretty sure, and I hope that you understand all these arithmetic operators. They sound complicated, but it's just a simple math that you can do in your program. So now we are going to cover the relational operators. So relational operators alongside arithmetic operators are quite important in the programming, and they are pretty much used everywhere in all the programming languages. And let me just list down the relational operators, and then we are going to understand how do we use them. I am writing down all of this code as a comment. So if you do want to take notes, or if you do want to remember something or take a screenshot, you can of this. So here we have 6 different types of relational operators. First of all, we have 2 equal signs. We must put 2 equal signs. We put 1 equal sign when we are trying to assign the value, but when we are trying to use relational operator, we must use 2 equal signs without any space, and it basically means equal to. So I can say if number 1 is equal to number 2, then please output a specific message that we are going to do later. And this is basically not equal to. This is greater than, less than, greater than, or equal to. So this can be that number 1 is greater than or equal to number 2, then output a specific message, and then we have a less than or equal to. So now we are going to understand this by using if-else statement. So we will use a combination of if-else with the relational operators, and it will be much easier for you to understand this. So our if-else statement is basically used for the decision making, and the basic syntax of this is that if we put two parentheses and there are curly brackets. So this is the basic syntax that we need to have in every if statement. We are going to use num1, and then we are going to use one of our relational operators. And what we can say is, we can say maybe that if relational number 1. In fact, let's just make a calculator that we were trying to make it first. So here we have two int variables, and now we are going to have char variable. We can name it calculations. So if our calculations, if our calculation variable, which is char, is equal to plus, so notice that we've used here are equal to relational operator, and then we use, so this is because the variable is uninitialized, we are going to ask it for the calculation. So now we are taking three different inputs. First of all, we are going to take our first number, secondly we have our second number, and thirdly we have our char, which is going to basically decide what calculation we are going to do. And here we have our if statement. So in this if statement, we first of all have the name of our variable calculation, then we use our relational operators, and then we give it a char value, which is in the apostrophes we have our plus value. Then we are going to use a cout result. So here we are going to use our arithmetic operator. We are going to say number 1 plus number 2 and L. Hope that you understand here what we have done. Let's just check how does it exactly work. So we give it a first value, which is 10, and then we can give it a second, and see, now it asks for calculation. Now we are going to say plus, and the moment we say plus, it basically activates this statement and it results in 15, which is right. Let's see if we put a wrong number, what exactly does it do. So we have 10, we again have 5, and then maybe we can put some random number, or maybe minus, and there's no result. That's because we don't have our if else statement for the minus. Now what we can do is we can put else, and else is not going to have those brackets like the if does, and we can say cout, please input the correct calculation sign. Now what this will do is, if this statement is not true, then this is going to be executed. We have give it a 5, and then maybe 5 again, and then once again let's put minus, and now you can see it gives us a error message, which is please input the correct calculation sign. Now let's see what if we want to have 2 or 3 if statements. What we will do is we will say else if, and then that's the syntax for this. When we are using the second time if statement, we need to say else if. So first of all, the program's going to look at this statement, it's going to go look at the calculation, whether it's equal to a plus sign. If it's not, it's going to execute the second one. The second one we can do calculations equal to minus, and then cout. result num1 minus num2. Now so far we've used our relational operator, which is we've used equal to operator, and I'm pretty sure that you understand this. We are going to also use maybe greater than or equal to, so that you also cover all these, so you'll be able to understand all these as well, the less than and greater to. Let's just run it. So out of all these three statements, we have three blocks. We have this, and then this, and then this. Only one of them will be executed. It's not going to execute 2 or 3, all them. It's only going to execute one of the statement. We're gonna have 10 and then 5, and then we can give it a minus value, and let's see what output do we get. And as you can see, we are getting result of 5, which is right. We're going to have else if, another else if statement. It will be for the calculations. If the calculation is equal to star multiplication, then it's cout's result, which is going to be number 1 multiplied by number 2. Let me just write it down for your understanding. Addition, subtraction, and then we have multiplication. We're going to have another else if statement, and this one's going to be for the division. Notice that we have these two quotation marks. We've discussed before that whenever we have a char, we must put them around them. So if we had a string, then we would have used the double quotation marks. And we have cout result number 1 arithmetic operators division, and then number 2. And this is our code basically, and this is for the error statement. This code will be basically provided in the description, so you can copy paste if you do want to. And then we run our statement, maybe 10, and then maybe another 10, and then it asks for the calculation. We say multiplication, and then we have 100 here, so it's working. Let's just check really quick for the division. 20 and then 2 division, and then we have 10. So we had 4 different types of multiplications. We've used our arithmetic operators to calculate them, and then we used our else if else statement to make the decision what exactly were we trying to do. Hope that you understood these programming concepts, and if you do want to, hope that you understood these programming concepts. We'll be giving this source code in the description, and if you do want to give a feedback, please do. That will be really helpful. Thank you.